This is just going to be a quick overview of the truck my father and I built. It's a 62 F100 unibody on a 2011 Crown Vic Police Interceptor chassis with a 2012 Mustang GT motor and a 76-75 Precision Turbo Gen 2 ball bearing with snow performance water and meth injection. Just a quick backstory on the truck. It was originally from Chilton, Alabama, where it was last on the road in the late 80s, and somehow it made its way all the way up to upstate New York, where a man was selling this and a 63 with a big back window as a package deal for $2,000. This was $500 and the other one was $1,500. So my father and I went out and picked up both of them. He had his truck and trailer and I had my buddy's dump truck and trailer, and this sat in his yard for quite a while. I think it was about a year or so. And then we decided that we were gonna do a Crown Vic frame swap on it. So I picked it up off of him for $500 and we did the frame swap together. We'll start off under the hood. Like I said, it's a 2012 Mustang GT engine. I was able to pick it up for $1,500 from a scrapyard down in Connecticut. I got it running on a test stand with Holley Terminator X-Max. It's got 11 to 14 Mustang headers that I got off eBay. I did have to modify one primary on this side and then two primaries on the driver's side due to the steering column. So it's got all stock rotating assembly. The heads are the same, the valve, the cam, everything is stock. It does have 80-pound Siemens injectors, NMR fuel rails, 3/8 braided line all the way back to the external pump, a Holley fuel regulator, and that pretty much wraps it up for strictly the engine part of it. Continuing to the cooling system, the radiator was from the 2011 Crown Vic. I did have to modify these mounts. This one actually came on the passenger side and the driver's side one came over here. So the radiator was actually pitched back a little bit, but when you flip them around and then you cut this and re-welded it straighter, so it used to come like back like at an angle. When you did that, it actually straightened up the radiator quite a bit and gave you a little bit more clearance, which I needed every little bit that I had with the 4.62 valve, especially with the Coyote. So I did have to make a crossover pipe. I made it out of stainless. There's one up here and then there's one on the bottom, which you can't really see very well. The Coyote and the Crown Vic didn't share the same inlet and outlet. They were flipped, so that was a need for the crossover pipe. It has a B&M transmission cooler. I mean, that was packed in there pretty tight as well. So there's -6 stainless lines on that. And it made a little bracket that stands it off from the radiator a little bit. As you can see there, gives me a little bit of clearance and adequate airflow. I very rarely see the transmission go over 180 degrees, even when I'm beating on it pretty bad, and the engine very rarely goes over 215 and sitting in traffic. And there's a power steering cooler down here. That was actually from the factory with the Police Interceptor package. So the Coyotes didn't come with a hydraulic power steering pump, as you probably know. So that's where this Volvo power steering pump comes into play. It's just an electric pump. You feed it 12 volts and then give it an ignition signal and it'll power your hydraulic rack, and it works pretty well. As far as the modifications to the body go, we took the Crown Vic floor pan and firewall and welded it into the truck. So what that did was it allowed us to use the stock blower location and AC coil, as well as the brake booster and the steering column. So we'll start the in-cab stuff over on the passenger side. If you just take a quick look around, it really doesn't look like there's a whole lot going on. It's got a wrinkled $20 seat cover, stock wheel. I mean, it's got the digital dash. That's kind of a giveaway something's going on at least. If you look underneath the glove box, you'll find a Holley Terminator X-Max. Now this is what controls the engine, the transmission, the drive-by-wire. This box is strictly for controlling the VVT system on the Coyote. This box is the controller for the Dakota digital dash, and it gets its signal from the Terminator as well. This is a standalone system from Snow Performance that does my meth and water injection. Now if you flip down what used to be the ashtray, you'll find a switch panel, and this switch controls the blower, this one controls the air conditioning, and then this one is the hazards. This is for the exhaust cutouts. You push it down for 5 seconds and it'll open up, and then you push it back up for 5 seconds and it'll close. This is for the dash, just scrolling through the menus on that. And this is the overdrive lockout button and its corresponding indicator light to tell you that the overdrive is locked out. So directly underneath it, you have the blower box. This is a factory blower box that has been modified by me and my father. It has a heating coil inside of it and then a bypass valve, which is over there. I'll show you that in a minute. And the stock ductwork location, which is also controlled by one of the switches over there. Behind here is just a little panel I made for wiring, just tidying up the wiring, and there's some relays and the coil drivers for the engine behind it. So we'll take a look over on the driver's side. One of the first things I want to go over is the steering setup. So this is the factory wheel, turn signal, and shifter out of the F100. The column is also factory, but we have modified it in order to accommodate the Crown Vic steering setup. So the old column used to run all the way down to the frame rail where it bolted, and now we shortened it 12 to 14 inches, added braces going back to the firewall, and added a joint, a shaft, a joint, and then another shaft that goes down to the rack. So this is a gas pedal out of 15 to 17 Mustang. I did have to make a little plate back here in order to bolt it to the factory location where the Crown Vic was, because the Crown Vic was drive-by-wire as well. So we take a look up here. These are your factory controls. This is the ignition switch. These are the wipers, just an on-off, as well as the lights. The lighter, yes, it does work. If you need 12 volts for your phone charger, your GPS, or what have you, that's where you can find it. On the other side, you'll notice this little light here. Some of you diehard guys will know, yes, that's not where it's supposed to go, and it was an option on like the camper specials and stuff like that. It had a separate switch panel inside of the glove box, but what this does here is it's wired into a 3-wire LED, so it'll turn green when the meth and water has been activated under boost, and it'll turn red when the level is low in the system. Next to that, we have the choke lever. So obviously this does not have a choke anymore. What this does is you pull this out and a bypass valve is opened in the, there's a heating coil in here. So when you pull this out, it allows coolant to cycle through the coil and give you heat through the ductwork. So if you wanted to defrost your windows, you would turn your blower on in the ashtray compartment, pull this out, and that's going to flip this little switch you can see right there, and it's going to push all that air up out through the ducts and defrost your windshield. If you wanted the air conditioner on, you would leave that in. So leaving that in allows the bypass of coolant, so no coolant will be running through the coil inside of that box right there. Push this in like that, and then the air will come out on the bottom, and then you just turn your 2 switches on, and then you control your temperature with this right here. So this is the control for the temperature on the air conditioning, and then this switch right here, you pull that out, and that's your 2-step and launch control. Now directly underneath that, you have the little screen for the Terminator X-Max, and then back there you can't really see it because I hit it, but there's a cable for the, well, you can kind of see it, the USB cable for the laptop. So if we take a look behind the seat, we'll find an Odyssey dry cell battery and fuse and relay panel. Starting from the top, this is for the reset if in the event that there's a rollover or an accident that'll shut the fuel pump off. Down here on the fuses, we have the oil pump, and that is actually it's a scavenge pump for the turbo, and it's a TurboWorks EXA pump. This is for the meth pump, the fuel pump, the blower, the air AC compressor, the radiator fan. Now that's, you'll notice it's only a 3 amp fuse, and that's because that is only receiving the signal from the Hotley. So that's why it's a 3 amp fuse, because it doesn't really put out more amperage than that. It's just a trigger. Now that triggers this relay up here for the radiator fan. This is for the fuel pump, the blower, the AC compressor, the meth pump, and the oil pump. Now down here you'll find the breaker for the power steering pump. And a fire extinguisher, and then that's really all you got going on back there. So at the very back of the truck, we have a raised bed. The bed material was just old decking that a friend had. It was all beaten up and weathered, and it worked really nicely. So if you just pick up a little bit right here, the air cylinders will take over. And from there you can see the 1970 Mustang gas tank. It fits like 12 to 13 gallons. And this rear end is from 98 to 02 Marquis. And then the reason I went for that was because it's a little bit narrower, and in order to run the wider wheels, I had to have a narrower rear end. And right in front of that, you have the 76-75 Precision Turbo. It's a Gen 2 ball bearing. I got dash 4 oil lines being fed from the engine, and then I'll go over it a little bit more later, but just giving you a rough idea. And then underneath this here, we have the meth and water tank. I just use Boost Juice. It's a premix from Stone Performance. I think it's only like $40 or so for a case of 4 on Amazon. Just wanted to touch on the oiling system for the turbo before I move to the undercarriage. So right there you can see that there's a T with a dash 4 line coming out of the feed for the oil pressure sensor. So one end of the T goes to the oil pressure sensor, and the other goes to the dash 4 feed line for the turbo. So before it goes to the turbo, it goes to this oil pressure regulator from Turbo Smart. So that's a 40 PSI regulator, and immediately to the left of that on the in-feed side is a filter. So what'll happen is, given the condition of, you know, the Coyote motor, it produces quite a bit of oil pressure, especially when it's cold. It can be upwards of 85 to 90 PSI, which is way too much for a ball bearing turbo. So anything over 40 PSI is directed through that bottom line and goes over to my passenger side valve cover and just recirculate it through the engine. And then anything under 40 PSI goes through that dash 4 feed line on the right hand side to the back of the truck into the turbo. And then the line you see right above it, the dash 6, is the return line from the TurboWorks EXA pump going to the driver's side valve cover right there. A little further bit of an explanation on the oiling system. Like I said before, it goes into a dash 4 feed line on the top of the turbo, and then it comes out into a dash 10 drain line, goes into the TurboWorks EXA pump, and then from there it goes to a dash 6, and that line goes all the way back to the passenger side, or excuse me, the driver's side valve cover, like I was showing you before. A little rundown on the fuel system. Like I said before, it's a 1970 Mustang GT gas tank. Goes to an AEM 300 liter per hour fuel pump, external, and then goes to a 3/8 hard line from there. Runs along the frame, and then it comes up here to my fuel filter, which is just a Jegs dash 6 in and out. Again, goes all the way to a hard line, back up to the firewall, where it then goes into a braided line, and then into my regulator. And then I'm using, this is actually the factory feed line. It's a 5/16, and I'm using that for my return line, and it just dumps back into the tank at the factory location. Just a quick overview of the exhaust setup. It comes out of the long tube headers and goes into a 2.5 inch exhaust on the passenger side into the flex joint over into a Y where it greets the driver's side, and then at that flex joint just before it goes into a 3-inch. So at the Y section all the way back to the turbo was a 3-inch, and let me get in a little bit closer to show you. It's a 46 millimeter precision turbo wastegate. I will plumb it eventually into the muffler, but for now it's just a straight dump onto the ground. And then it goes into a 3-inch V-band into the turbo. Just a little bit more of an explanation on the exhaust system. It goes into a 4-inch outside of the turbo, next down into a 3, comes outside of the bed here into a V-band, down to here where there's the exhaust cutouts located. So, I mean, if you want that exhaust cut out, it's only a few inches off the ground when it's at ride height, and it's pretty rowdy. But when it's shut, it goes through the Dynamax muffler, which kind of shuts it up a little bit, and then dumps right in front of the axle. Again, it's all a 3-inch system. Eventually, at some point, I'll probably redo it and shoot it out the back. But for now, like I said, the wastegate just dumps right on the ground, and so does that. But I'll plumb this up over the drive shaft and then go into right above the muffler, so that'll quiet the whole system down. So the charge pipe is just a 3-inch aluminum tube coming out of the turbocharger. Up on the top there, if you follow that red line, that's where the meth and water injection nozzle is located. And then you can see it's on the 180 of this plugged off one. I just put that in there in case I wanted to add another nozzle for more meth, but for now I'm just running the one. And there's my solenoid right there for the injection. Goes back to the pump here, which is hidden up underneath, and then that follows the line back up to the tank. So if we look directly under the turbo, we can see that I used a Maven mount. They make a very slick product. I highly recommend them to anybody. In this situation, I was able to just use the Maven mount on the bottom of the turbo, and then I found a couple pieces of pipe and just welded the pipe into the mount, and then I'll go up top and show you how I connected them together. So on the top here, you can see the 2 pipes that came out of the Maven mount. They just go into the framework for the raised floor. And that's all you really had to do. I mean, like I said, it was a very slick product, easy to use. I just wanted to mention one more thing while I was under here. The upper control arm, that actually had to be custom made. So I just took a piece of box tube and got a set of poly bushings, put that in. And the reason I had to make it custom was I had to lengthen it. So that right there is a housing that's adjustable. You can see the 3 different bolt holes that are in it that I had to make in order to fit the rear tire. Given that the rear tire was wider and taller, the factory location that was on the frame, it was going to hit it. So I had to extend that arm and, I mean, just try to keep the same geometry that it had, and furthermore made it adjustable if it was off a little bit. But so far it's worked out pretty good, and it's been about 3 years. There's a few things that I forgot during the video to mention. One of them being that in the wastegate there's a 7-pound spring. So it sees about 6, maybe 5.5 PSI in the manifold, which is well within the range of what's safe, especially with water and methanol injection. Guys have ran more than that and still been okay. But I mean, the truck's an absolute ball to drive as it is. So I'll just leave it how it is for now. Maybe bump it up to 9-pound spring down the road. The second thing is the transmission. I didn't really touch much on the transmission. I rebuilt that in the basement over the winter. I'd have to list off a lot of the stuff that I put in it to be able to withstand the power level that it has, and I'd have to guess that power level is somewhere between 600 and 700. It's really not that much. I mean, you could push it a little bit harder if you really wanted to. And the other would be the Meth system uses, I believe it's a number 6 nozzle. And that's all I can really think of that I may have forgotten. I'll just do a quick startup. The first thing you're going to hear come on is the fuel pump for the prime, and then the second will be the power steering pump. cutouts closed. Hold it down, let it open. Back up and we'll take it around the block. This is a quick demonstration of the two-step. Pull the switch out, push your foot on the brake, let it build the revs, let go of the brake. Away you go. Do a small pull from a stop. I realize those videos weren't the greatest, but the camera mount I have sucks. So I'll post better ones when I get a good camera mount or I have somebody ride with me. And there's a storm coming in, so I don't want to go back out again. But you get the idea. If you got any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below and I'll answer them the best I can. Thanks for watching.